You ever catch yourself thinking and then realize you haven't stopped all day? You're making coffee and your brain's solving imaginary arguments. You're in the shower, but your mind's already in a meeting that hasn't happened. It's like thought just takes over, uninvited, non-stop, loud. And here's the strange part. We don't question it. We don't even notice it. It feels normal, natural. But that constant mental chatter? That's not clarity. That's addiction. We've been conditioned to believe that always thinking means we're in control, that mental activity equals intelligence, responsibility, awareness. But what if it's the opposite? What if overthinking is the very thing pulling you away from life? We treat thought like oxygen, as if we'll die without it. But thought is a tool. And the moment it starts using you, things get messy. You feel exhausted, scattered, disconnected, not because something's wrong with you, but because your mind never gets quiet. And the scariest part? You've gotten so used to the noise. Silence feels suspicious, but stillness isn't a void. It's presence. And once you see the mind's game for what it is, you'll start to feel something you forgot was even possible. Peace without a problem to solve. 1. The invisible addiction to thought. Most people don't even realize it, but they're not thinking. They're overthinking. Thought has become like background noise in a coffee shop. It's always there, always buzzing, but no one stops to question where it's coming from or why it never shuts off. The addiction hides behind a mask of productivity. After all, how can something so constant be a problem, right? But there's a difference between thinking and being unable to stop thinking. That difference is everything. It's like an app running in the background, draining your battery, and you have no clue. You sit down to rest, but your mind keeps pacing, planning, replaying, projecting, not because you want to, but because it's all you know. Thought has become a habit, not a tool. And like any habit, it becomes invisible the longer you've had it. You don't notice it anymore. You just live inside it. Picture this. You're brushing your teeth and your mind's planning dinner. You're in a meeting and your mind's replaying last night's argument. You're lying in bed and your mind's already in tomorrow. That's not awareness. That's overthinking dressed up as concern. But here's the trap. It feels normal. That's what makes it so dangerous. Addiction doesn't always show up as chaos. Sometimes it shows up as routine, familiar, harmless. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice something strange. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels like something's missing. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a coincidence. 2. Thought pretends to be helpful but mostly distracts. Thought wears a clever disguise. It shows up like a friend offering advice, whispering solutions, giving you something to figure out. It convinces you that without it you'd forget something important or lose control of your life. But in truth, most of what passes through the mind isn't wisdom. It's recycled noise. It's the same doubts dressed in new costumes, the same fears running in different directions, the same stories looping with different names. And yet, we trust it because it feels familiar, because it sounds like us. But just because something is loud doesn't mean it's true. Take a moment and observe the mind when you're doing something simple, washing the dishes, walking to the store. Instead of being present, the mind is usually far ahead or far behind. Replaying old conversation, predicting what could go wrong, planning what you'll say next. But notice how rarely these thoughts bring peace. Most of them stir anxiety, comparison, judgment, or indecision. They masquerade as preparation, but they rarely lead to resolution. It's like trying to reach the ocean by rowing in a bathtub. People say they need to think through things, that it's how they solve problems. And sometimes that's true. Thinking has its place, but most of the time the so-called solutions we're seeking are to imaginary problems. You start wondering if someone's upset with you because they didn't text back fast enough. Your mind spirals. But in reality, they were just making a sandwich. Overthinking isn't helping you solve life, it's helping you avoid being in it. That's not intelligence, that's distraction. The mind is brilliant at pretending it's useful. It will make you believe you're making progress when you're really just running in place. It'll turn silence into a courtroom, solitude into loneliness, and rest into restlessness. It keeps your focus on the future or the past, because that's where thought survives best. In the present, thought has no job, and so it distracts you from presence at all costs. And once you start to see how sneaky it is, you begin to wonder, what else is it hiding behind its noise? 3. The mind narrates every moment. Even when life is quiet, the mind keeps talking. There's a constant narrator in the background, commenting, questioning, second-guessing. Am I doing this right? Should I feel something different? What comes next? It doesn't matter what you're doing, meditating, walking, even trying to relax. The mind tries to take control. And because it's been this way for so long, we've mistaken this mental narration for reality. We've made the voice in our head the main character without ever asking, who's listening? Imagine trying to enjoy a moment of peace, like sitting by a lake. Your body is still, the world is calm, but your mind is calculating, analyzing, remembering. It's like having a sports commentator for your entire life, constant play-by-plays, even when nothing's happening. And here's the strange part. If the narration stops, we get uncomfortable, as if something must be wrong. We've become addicted to the noise, to the mental commentary, not because it helps, but because silence feels unfamiliar. This is why most people can't sit still for long. They need a screen, a book, a conversation, a plan. Because when nothing's happening outside, the noise inside becomes deafening. The addiction isn't just to thought, it's to narration, the story, the labels, the conclusions. It's not enough to feel something, the mind wants to explain it. Not enough to just be, the mind wants to define you. It keeps you in a loop where every experience is filtered through a judgment. And judgment steals the rawness of reality. Here's where it gets practical. Next time you're walking, try this. Don't label anything. Don't say tree, sky, or car. Just look. Just be there. Watch how quickly the mind tries to jump in with names and thoughts. That urge to narrate is the addiction. It's subtle, but powerful. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, the game starts to change. Because the more you notice the narration, the more you begin to wonder who's watching the story unfold. 4. You're reacting to thoughts like notifications. Every thought that pops up feels like a message you have to answer, a notification you can't ignore. Whether it's a worry about the future or a memory from years ago, the moment it shows up, your whole body reacts. And that's the trap. We don't just hear the thought, we believe it. We act on it, we feed it. Like checking your phone every 2 minutes, there's this impulse to respond. But most of what shows up in the mind isn't new. It's old noise, resurfacing in a new disguise. Think about how many times you've had the same argument in your head with someone from your past, or a conversation that never even happened. These thought loops pull you in like clickbait, and just like online junk, they steal your time and attention, leaving you drained but weirdly addicted. You didn't ask for the thought, but it showed up, and you assumed it was important. That assumption is what keeps the addiction alive, because reacting gives it life, and silence, ironically, feels unnatural. This is where awareness becomes a superpower. Not in suppressing the thought, but in recognizing that you don't have to answer it. Just because a thought appears doesn't mean it deserves your time. Not every mental notification needs a reply. In fact, most are just echoes, fragments of past fears, unfinished stories, habitual reactions. When you stop treating thoughts like urgent emails and more like background noise, something shifts. You start choosing what gets your energy, instead of letting thought decide for you. It's not easy at first. The pull is strong. But every time you pause, every time you notice a thought without chasing it, you're breaking the cycle. You're reclaiming space, space between stimulus and reaction. And in that space, presence begins to reappear, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding the noise. Silence starts to speak louder than the mind, and what you begin to feel is not absence, but something far more real than thought ever offered. 5. Silence feels uncomfortable because we forgot how to just be. Most people weren't taught to be still, they were taught to be busy, to fill the space, to think, plan, improve, solve. And so silence becomes threatening, like there's something wrong if you're not doing something. But this discomfort isn't natural, it's trained. It's the result of living in a world that values doing over being, thinking over feeling, noise over presence. So when things finally slow down and thought isn't leading the moment, it feels strange, unfamiliar, even wrong. But it's not wrong, it's real. You weren't born overthinking. You didn't come into this world addicted to thought. As a child, you could stare at a wall for 20 minutes and be completely absorbed in it. That wasn't boredom, it was presence. But over time, that presence was replaced with conditioning. You were taught to analyze, achieve, anticipate. Thought became your compass, even when it pointed nowhere. And now, when silence arises, the addiction kicks in, telling you to check your phone, start a conversation, worry about something, anything. Just don't be still. But stillness is not the enemy. In fact, it's the only space where truth can echo, where awareness gets louder than thought. The discomfort you feel in silence isn't from the silence, it's from the detox, the withdrawal from stimulation, that twitch to grab your phone, to scroll, to escape. That's the mind craving its drug, thought. And the moment you stop feeding it, even for a second, the addiction starts screaming. But let it scream, let the noise rise. Eventually, it collapses into itself. If you can sit through the initial discomfort, if you can breathe through the silence without labeling it as wasted time, something opens. You begin to notice subtle shifts, your breath, your posture, your surroundings. Presence returns, not because you chased it, but because you stopped chasing everything else. And the more time you spend here, the more natural it becomes, not as an escape from life, but as a return to it. 6. Thinking is not control. It's a substitute for presence. The mind has convinced you that thinking equals control, that if you can just think enough, you'll avoid mistakes, pain, or failure. That thinking will keep you one step ahead. But here's the twist. Most of that thinking isn't making life better. It's just keeping you from being in it. It's like trying to drive by only staring at the GPS and never looking out the window. You end up somewhere, sure, but you have no idea how you got there or if you even enjoyed the ride. Control is one of the mind's favorite illusions. It offers the fantasy that, through overthinking, you can manage the chaos of life. But real life isn't controllable. It's unpredictable, wild, spontaneous. And ironically, when you're trying to control it through compulsive thought, you miss the natural intelligence that arises when you're fully present. That instinctive clarity, that quiet knowing, the kind that shows up in moments of silence, not in mental noise. Awareness is not something you manufacture, it's something you return to when thought isn't in the way. There's a deeper intelligence available, but you can't access it while trying to micromanage reality. Ever had a moment where the solution just appeared in your mind while you were doing something unrelated, like showering or walking? That's what happens when you stop trying to figure it out and start letting go. The insight comes not from more thinking, but from less, from space, from presence, from being available to what's already here, instead of obsessed with what might happen next. So no, thinking isn't control. It's a habit that substitutes presence with prediction, awareness with anxiety, life with commentary. The truth is, the less you try to control life through the mind, the more naturally it flows, not because you gave up, but because you stopped getting in the way. Presence isn't passive, it's powerful. And when you realize you don't have to think your way through every second, you start to live your way through it instead. 7. Awareness begins. When thought steps aside, awareness doesn't compete with thought. It just waits. It's the space that thought appears in, but it's often drowned out by the noise. Most people are so used to identifying with the voice in their head that they forget there's even a difference between thinking and being aware. But once thought begins to quiet, even for a moment, something softer, something deeper begins to shine through. Not a new thought, not a new belief, but a quiet recognition that you are not your thinking mind. Real clarity doesn't come from trying harder to think better. It comes from recognizing when thought has run its course, and that can happen anywhere, mid-conversation, during a walk, while staring out the window. There's a moment when the mental noise fades, and you feel more here than ever. You didn't do anything. You didn't solve anything. You just stopped chasing thoughts, and suddenly the world becomes clearer. Not because it changed, but because you did. Awareness came forward when thinking stepped back. This is the difference between being lost in thought and being rooted in presence. One feels tight, urgent, full of pressure. The other feels open, calm, effortless. Awareness isn't something you access, it's something you uncover, like wiping steam from a mirror. It's been there the whole time. And when you rest in that awareness, even for a few seconds, you start to realize how unnecessary most of your mental habits really are. Overthinking, worrying, analyzing, it all starts to feel like static on an old TV. You don't have to fight thought. You don't have to suppress it. You just have to see it clearly. And when you do, the addiction begins to fade. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped fueling it. You begin to glimpse something quieter, something more true that lives behind the noise. And once you know it's there, even if it disappears again, part of you can't forget. A door has been opened. And whether you walk through or not, something in you knows this is what you've been looking for. 8. Breaking the addiction by watching the habit. You don't break the addiction to overthinking by force. You break it by seeing. Watching thought without jumping into the story. Like someone watching traffic pass from a bench instead of running into the road. It sounds simple, but it's one of the most radical shifts a person can make. Because for most of their life, they were the traffic. Every thought that appeared felt like something they had to follow. But when you start observing your thoughts, you begin to realize you are not the traffic. You're the sky it moves through. This is where freedom begins. Not in changing your thoughts, not in trying to have more positive ones, but in realizing you are not your thoughts at all. Try this. Next time a stressful thought appears, pause. Don't react. Don't judge it. Just notice it. Name it silently, like worry or regret. Watch how it tries to pull you in. Watch how your body wants to respond. And then don't. Just watch. That moment right there, that's presence, that's awareness, that's power. The space between awareness and thought is where life actually happens. That's where your real intelligence lives. Not the calculating mind, not the overthinking brain, but the clarity that emerges when you stop trying to manage every moment. This is why ancient traditions spoke so much about silence, meditation, and stillness, not as escapes, but as ways to come back. Back to the place where you can see clearly, act consciously, and rest in what's real, not just what's familiar. And the more you practice this, watching instead of reacting, noticing instead of believing, the more the addiction begins to lose its grip. It becomes harder for the mind to trick you. The thoughts still come, but you don't chase them. The fears still whisper, but you don't run. You begin to sense a kind of quiet strength within you, not made of thoughts, not born of effort, just still, just aware. And from that stillness, life begins to unfold in a completely different way.